The world I thought I knew, the solid ground beneath my feet, it all began to crack and crumble the day I found that box. Not with a bang, you understand, not with some dramatic revelation in a dusty attic, but with a quiet, almost imperceptible shift, like the first faint tremor before an earthquake. My name is Alara, and for 32 years, I lived a life I believed was real. A life built on stories and traditions passed down through generations, a tapestry woven with love and laughter, and the comfortable hum of family. But underneath, hidden in the shadows, lay a truth so cold, so sharp it threatened to unravel everything. It started subtly, as these things often do. My grandmother, Clara, had always been the anchor of our family, a woman of quiet strength, and a seemingly endless well of gentle wisdom. When she passed, peacefully in her sleep at 94, it left a void that echoed through our old Victorian house. Clearing out her things was a task my mother, Sarah, approached with a quiet reverence, a mixture of grief and nostalgia. I offered to help, mostly to be near my mom during her sorrow, to sort through the memories with her. One rainy afternoon, we were in the study, a room Clara had filled with books and antique curiosities. Dust motes danced in the weak sunlight filtering through the tall windows. My mother was meticulously organizing Clara's extensive collection of first edition novels, each one a cherished friend to her. I, meanwhile, was tackling a forgotten corner, a small, built-in cupboard tucked away behind a heavy velvet curtain. It felt like a secret place even before I opened it. Inside, nestled beneath a stack of old photo albums and a faded shawl, was a wooden box. It wasn't ornate, just a simple cedar chest, smooth with age, with a tarnished brass latch. No key, no lock, just a simple catch. My fingers traced the grain of the wood. There was something about it, a faint, almost imperceptible scent of dried lavender, and something else, something metallic, like old paper clips or forgotten coins. I pulled it out, resting it on my lap. My mother, engrossed in a particularly rare Dickens, barely glanced up. "What is that, dear?" she murmured, without really looking. "Just an old box," I replied, already feeling a strange pull towards its contents. Opening it was like opening a time capsule. The first thing I saw wasn't a document or a photograph, but a small, intricately carved wooden bird, a swallow, its wings poised for flight. It felt impossibly light in my hand, smooth and cool. Beneath it, meticulously arranged, were layers of old letters, tied with faded silk ribbons, a small leather-bound journal, and a handful of sepia-toned photographs. The air in the room seemed to thicken, almost as if the past itself was exhaling. I picked up one of the photographs. It was a portrait, a young woman, perhaps in her early 20s, with wide, intelligent eyes and a cascade of dark, curly hair. She was beautiful, certainly, but it wasn't just her beauty that caught my attention. There was a striking resemblance to me, not a mirror image, but an echo, a familial whisper in her features, in the curve of her smile. This wasn't my grandmother. I knew all my grandmother's youthful photos. This woman was a stranger, yet undeniably connected. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the drafts in the old house. "Who is this?" I asked, my voice softer than I intended, almost a whisper. My mother finally looked over, her brow furrowing slightly as she caught sight of the photograph. She walked over, taking it from my hand. Her expression shifted, subtly at first, then more pronounced. A flicker of something I couldn't quite place crossed her face. Surprise, recognition, and then, unmistakably, a deep, unsettling apprehension. She didn't answer immediately. She just stared at the picture, her fingers brushing the smooth surface. "That is," she began, then stopped, her gaze fixed somewhere beyond the photograph, as if recalling a distant, forgotten memory. She cleared her throat. "That is an old relative, Alara. Someone from a long time ago." She tried to sound casual, but her voice was strained, a little too high. It was a performance, and a rather poor one, I realized later. But at the moment, caught in the strange pull of the box, I didn't press. I simply nodded, accepting her vague explanation, though a seed of doubt had already been planted. I spent the rest of the afternoon immersed in the box's contents. The letters were old, their ink faded, written in a florid, elegant hand I didn't recognize. They were in German, which I couldn't read. The journal, however, was in English, though the handwriting was tiny and cramped, difficult to decipher. It seemed to belong to the woman in the photograph, or at least her name, Eleonora, was scrawled on the inside cover. Eleonora. The name resonated with a strange familiarity, like a forgotten melody. The journal entries weren't linear, jumping through dates and years, but what I could piece together painted a picture of a life I could barely comprehend. There were references to a wealthy family, a grand estate, hushed conversations, and a growing sense of fear. Phrases like a terrible secret, forced silence, and the injustice of it all appeared repeatedly. There were mentions of a betrayal, a loss, and a desperate plea for someone, anyone, to remember her. It was intensely personal, raw, and deeply unsettling. I kept this discovery to myself for a few days, the box hidden under my bed, a Pandora's box whispering secrets in the quiet of the night. My mother's evasiveness bothered me, gnawing at the edges of my mind. Why had she reacted that way? Why had Clara kept such a box hidden? My grandmother, who had always been an open book, a fount, be exposed as complicit in a monstrous deception. Her identity, her very sense of self, will be annihilated. And what of the Vespers? If their secret is out, if it's revealed they raised the child of an enemy, their standing, their power, everything they hold dear, will crumble. The regime would not tolerate such a scandal. They would silence everyone involved. Including you. Including us. Including Serafina. His words were a cold splash of reality, extinguishing the fiery anger that had begun to burn within me. The danger was real. The stakes were impossibly high. This wasn't just about my personal pain, my sense of betrayal. It was about the lives of everyone involved, a fragile house of cards ready to collapse at the slightest breath of truth. I tried to imagine Serafina's reaction. Her unwavering loyalty to her adoptive parents, her pride in General Vesper's accomplishments, her deep-seated belief in the regime's righteousness. To tell her that her entire life was a carefully constructed lie, that her parents were not her parents, that her biological mother was a woman branded an enemy of the state, murdered by the very system her adoptive family upheld, it would utterly destroy her. It would be a cruelty almost as profound as the original act of taking her. But to keep it silent, to continue to smile, to nod, to pretend, knowing this monstrous truth, how could I? How could I look into Serafina's eyes, knowing she was my cousin, knowing the unspeakable tragedy of her birth, knowing the deception that had shaped her entire existence? The very air in my study seemed to thicken, heavy with the weight of that unspeakable truth. My hands, still clutching the brittle, ancient document that had unleashed this maelstrom, trembled uncontrollably. It was a fragment of a private log, meticulously kept by one of General Vesper's most trusted, now long-deceased aides, a man whose loyalty I had once admired, now revealed as a silent accomplice in a monstrous deception. The log detailed, with chilling precision, the circumstances of Alara's capture, her defiant final moments, and the subsequent discovery of her infant daughter. An infant taken, not rescued, but appropriated. The aide's entries spoke of the general's unwavering conviction that this child, Serafina, was better off raised within the regime's embrace, cleansed of her dissident mother's taint, molded into a pillar of the very system that had extinguished her birthright. There was no remorse, only a cold, calculated pragmatism. The log even contained a cryptic reference to a physical characteristic, a small, almost imperceptible birthmark behind the left ear, a detail I had once noticed on Serafina during a childhood illness. Dismissed as a triviality, now a searing brand of undeniable proof. I slumped into my worn leather chair, the paper still rustling in my grip like dry leaves. The room, usually a sanctuary of quiet contemplation, felt like a cage. My mind raced, replaying every interaction, every casual remark, every shared laugh with Serafina. Had I ever truly seen her? Or had I, too, been complicit in the collective blindness, accepting the official narrative without question? Her fierce loyalty to the general, her unwavering belief in the state's benevolence, her almost religious devotion to the ideals of order and security. These were not innate qualities, I now understood, but carefully cultivated constructs, built upon a foundation of stolen identity and enforced amnesia. The general. His image loomed in my mind, a colossus of authority, a figure I had long respected, even revered, despite my growing internal reservations about some of his policies. He was a man of iron will, a leader who had guided our nation through turbulent times, or so the history books proclaimed. But this was a betrayal on a scale I had not thought him capable of. It was not a strategic error, not a regrettable necessity of war, but a deeply personal, ethically reprehensible act. He had taken a child, orphaned her, and then raised her as his own, not out of compassion, but out of a perverse sense of control, a desire to erase a lineage deemed undesirable. And my aunt, his wife, Serafina's adoptive mother. Had she known? Had she been a willing participant in this charade? Or an unwitting pawn, herself deceived? Her gentle nature, her quiet grace, seemed utterly incompatible with such a monstrous secret. Yet she had raised Serafina, loved her as her own. The thought of her complicity was almost as disturbing as the general's calculated cruelty. It shattered another piece of the world I thought I knew, revealing a landscape of shadows and moral ambiguities where I had once seen clear lines of right and wrong. The implications extended beyond the personal. Ilara, Serafina's biological mother, was a celebrated figure among the dissident factions, a martyr whose memory fueled their resistance. Her alleged crime, inciting unrest against the state, was a carefully crafted narrative designed to demonize her. If the truth of her daughter's fate and the general's direct involvement were to emerge, it would not merely be a scandal, it would be an earthquake. The carefully constructed edifice of the regime, built on narratives of justice and order, would crack and crumble. The trust of the populace, already strained by recent economic hardships and whispers of corruption, would evaporate. The dissidents would gain an undeniable moral victory, their claims of state brutality and deception validated in the most dramatic fashion. Civil unrest, even outright rebellion, could follow. The fragile peace we maintained, often through strict control and suppression, could shatter into 1,000 bloody pieces. I pushed myself up, pacing the small confines of my study. The air felt suffocating, my breath hitched in my throat. Every fiber of my being screamed for justice, for the truth to be known. Serafina deserved to know who she was, to understand the true tragedy of her birth. Her mother deserved to be remembered for who she truly was, not the caricature painted by the state. The general deserved to face the consequences of his actions. But at what cost? The image of Serafina's face, alight with her usual earnest enthusiasm, flashed before my eyes. Her smile, her laugh, her unwavering belief in the good of the world, even in the face of its harsh realities. To strip that away, to replace it with a gaping wound of betrayal and loss, felt like an act of unspeakable cruelty. She would lose everything: her parents, her identity, her faith. The world she knew would disintegrate, leaving her adrift in a sea of questions and pain. Could I be the one to inflict that? Could I bear the responsibility for her utter devastation, even if it was in the name of truth? And what about my own safety, my own position? I was a trusted advisor, a member of the inner circle, privy to state secrets. This discovery, if revealed by me, would not only brand me a traitor but also expose me to extreme danger. The general, a man who had orchestrated such a complex deception for decades, would not hesitate to silence anyone who threatened his carefully constructed legacy. My life, my family's safety, would be forfeit. The thought was a cold, hard stone in my gut. I walked to the window, staring out at the city lights twinkling in the distance. a deceptive calm over the sleeping metropolis. Each light represented a life, a family, a fragile existence that could be upended by the choices I was contemplating. My own life had been shaped by a sense of duty, a desire to serve the greater good, to uphold the principles of justice and stability. But what was justice now, in this twisted landscape? Was it the brutal unveiling of a truth that would tear lives apart, or the preservation of a fragile peace built on a lie? I thought of my own parents, their quiet sacrifices, their unwavering belief in integrity. They had taught me that truth was paramount, that honesty was the bedrock of all honorable action. But they had never faced a truth so devastating, so pregnant with destructive potential. They had never had to weigh the personal cost of integrity against the potential for widespread chaos and suffering. The more I turned it over in my mind, the more tangled the threads became. There was no easy answer, no clear path. It was a moral labyrinth, each turn leading to another impossible choice. I needed time. Time to think, to process, to perhaps even seek out more information. The AIDS log was compelling, but were there other corroborating pieces of evidence? Other voices from that shadowed past? The thought of digging further, of venturing deeper into this dangerous secret, filled me with a mixture of dread and grim determination. I had to be certain, absolutely certain, before I even considered taking a single step towards revelation. I carefully folded the fragile log, tucking it into a hidden compartment within my desk, a compartment only I knew existed. The act felt clandestine, like a betrayal in itself, even though I was merely securing the evidence. My fingers brushed against the cool metal of the lock, a symbolic barrier against the chaos it contained. The next few days were a blur of internal torment. I carried the secret like a physical burden, a lead weight in my chest. Every conversation felt like a performance, every smile a mask. When I spoke with Serafina, my gaze lingered on her, searching for echoes of Alara, for any sign that the truth might already be stirring within her. I saw only her familiar warmth, her genuine affection, and a renewed pang of guilt pierced me. How could I shatter such innocence? During a routine briefing with General Vesper, I found myself studying him with an intensity I had never before allowed. His sharp eyes, his commanding presence, his occasional paternal gesture toward Serafina all seemed to take on a sinister new meaning. Was the paternalism genuine, born of years of raising her, or merely a sophisticated act, a perpetuation of the lie? I watched his hands, strong and capable, hands that had guided a nation, but also, according to the log, hands that had sanctioned the abduction and deception. A cold knot formed in my stomach. I found myself struggling to meet his gaze, afraid that my eyes would betray the knowledge burning within me. I decided I needed more, not just for Serafina, but for myself, to fully grasp the enormity of what had transpired. The AIDS log hinted at other individuals involved, lower-level functionaries, some of whom might still be alive. My official position granted me access to many archives, many forgotten corners of the state apparatus. I began to subtly redirect my research, ostensibly focusing on historical security protocols or past dissident movements, but in truth I was searching for any mention of Alara, any overlooked detail that could shed more light on her story and the fate of her child. It was a dangerous game. My inquiries had to be discreet, my questions carefully phrased lest I draw unwanted attention. Every search query, every document request, felt like walking a tightrope over an abyss. I spent long nights in the state archives, poring over dusty files and encrypted data logs. The official records painted a clear, stark picture of Alara, a dangerous radical, a threat to national security, justly apprehended and executed. But beneath the surface, in the margins of reports, in the footnotes of obscure documents, I began to find discrepancies, small inconsistencies that hinted at a different narrative. There was a series of internal memos, heavily redacted, concerning a specific detention facility that had been closed shortly after Alara's alleged execution. The memos spoke of unusual security measures, of limited access, and of a sudden, unexplained transfer of personnel. Then, I found a medical report, misfiled under a different general's command, detailing the birth of a female infant within that same facility, around the exact time Alara was said to have been held. The mother's name was redacted, but the birth date and location matched the timeline described in the aide's log. The infant was listed as having a distinctive birthmark behind the left ear. My heart hammered against my ribs. It was another piece, chillingly precise, confirming the aide's account. The medical report was brief, clinical, devoid of emotion. It simply stated the infant was healthy and had been transferred to the care of designated state guardians. No mention of Alara's fate, no mention of the child's true parentage. Just a cold bureaucratic paper trail leading to the general's private residence. The weight of the evidence grew heavier, pressing down on me. I was no longer dealing with a single, potentially unreliable source. I had concrete, independent corroboration. The lie was not a rumor. It was a meticulously constructed edifice of deceit, built into the very fabric of the state's historical records. The more I uncovered, the more my moral compass spun wildly. The regime I served, the very foundation of my career and identity, was implicated in a profound injustice, and I, by virtue of my discovery, was now inextricably bound to it. To reveal it would be to tear down not just a man, but potentially the entire system. To suppress it would be to become a silent guardian of that injustice, a complicit enabler of the lie. I considered confiding in someone. My closest colleague, perhaps, a man whose judgment I generally trusted. But even that thought felt reckless. The secret was too dangerous, too explosive. To share it was to risk not only my own life, but also the life of anyone I entrusted with it. This was a burden I had to bear alone, at least for now. The isolation was crushing. I found myself withdrawing, becoming more reserved, more watchful. My colleagues noticed the change, attributing it to stress from my demanding workload. I feigned exhaustion, burying myself deeper in my duties, using the semblance of work to mask my internal turmoil. One evening, Serafina invited me to dinner at the general's residence. The invitation was a customary gesture of familial warmth, but this time it felt like a summons to a crucible. I dressed carefully, my mind a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. As I walked through the familiar halls of the general's home, every portrait, every antique, every polished surface seemed to gleam with a deceptive sheen, hiding the rot beneath. Serafina greeted me with her usual embrace, her eyes sparkling. "Cousin, it's been too long," she said, her voice light and genuine. "Father has been asking about you." My smile felt brittle, a fragile mask. "Serafina, it's good to see you." My gaze flickered to the general, who stood by the fireplace, a glass of amber liquid in his hand, his expression unreadable. He offered a curt nod, a gesture of reserved welcome. Throughout dinner I found myself observing them, searching for tells, for cracks in their carefully constructed personas. Serafina spoke of her work, her plans for a new educational initiative, her unwavering belief in the general's vision for the nation. Each word was a fresh stab, a reminder of the elaborate deception that had shaped her very being. The general listened, occasionally interjecting with a word of advice or approval, his demeanor calm, authoritative, utterly devoid of any hint of the dark secret he harbored. He asked me about my current projects, my progress on the archival review. My heart leaped into my throat. Was he testing me? Did he suspect anything? I answered with carefully chosen words, maintaining a professional facade, offering only generalized updates, avoiding any mention of the specific areas I had been secretly investigating. His eyes, sharp and intelligent, seemed to bore into mine, but I held my ground, my expression neutral. Later, as Serafina and I lingered over dessert, she spoke of her mother, the general's wife. who had passed away years ago. She was such a gentle soul, Serafina mused, a faraway look in her eyes. So kind, so loving, she always made me feel safe, cherished. A wave of nausea washed over me. Cherished, yes, but also a pawn in a grand deception. Had her adoptive mother truly been unaware? Or had her kindness been a form of complicity, a quiet acceptance of the general's decree? The thought was almost unbearable. It tainted the memory of a woman I had once held in high regard. I managed to offer a non-committal response, my voice sounding strained even to my own ears. Serafina, engrossed in her memories, seemed not to notice. She continued, "Sometimes I wonder what my life would have been like if I hadn't been so lucky, if Father hadn't taken me in. The world outside these walls can be so cruel." Her words hung in the air, an ironic dagger. She spoke of luck, of kindness, of a world outside these walls that she knew only through carefully curated reports. She had no idea how truly cruel that world had been to her, how it had stolen her very origins. The urge to speak, to shatter the illusion, was almost overwhelming. My throat tightened, my hands clenched beneath the table. But then I saw the fragile hope in her eyes, the genuine love she held for her adoptive parents, and the words died on my tongue. I left the general's residence that night feeling more profoundly alone than ever before. The weight of the secret felt heavier, more suffocating. The dinner had not brought clarity, it had only deepened the moral mire. The next morning I found myself back in my study, the aide's log once again in my hands. I reread the final entries, searching for any hint of remorse, any sign of a moral struggle. There was none. Only a detached recounting of events, a bureaucratic justification for an act of profound injustice. The aide spoke of the necessity of maintaining order, of neutralizing threats, of shaping a new generation free from the ideological impurities of the past. It was a chilling philosophy, one that elevated state security above individual rights, that justified any means to achieve its ends. And the general, by his actions, had clearly subscribed to it. The question of what to do gnawed at me relentlessly. I considered the extreme options. Option 1. Expose everything. Release the documents, the logs, the medical reports, to the public, to the dissident factions, to anyone who would listen. The general would be ruined, his legacy shattered, his reputation irrevocably stained. Serafina would learn the truth in the most brutal, public way possible. The regime would face an unprecedented crisis of legitimacy, potentially leading to widespread unrest, even civil war. Lives would be lost, chaos would. A family anecdotes had clearly kept this particular chapter locked away. It was so unlike her. And the resemblance to Eleonora, it was more than just a passing similarity. It was striking, a mirror reflecting a past I didn't know existed. The more I looked at my own reflection, the more I saw Eleonora's eyes staring back. It was unnerving. I started searching through old family albums again, this time with a new, critical eye. I looked for any mention of Eleonora, any photograph that might include her, but she was conspicuously absent from our official family history. It was as if she had been erased, meticulously scrubbed from the narrative. That alone was a powerful statement. One evening, unable to contain my growing unease, I brought the box out again. My parents were watching television, a bland sitcom playing in the background. I walked into the living room, the cedar box held firmly in my hands, and placed it on the coffee table. My mother looked up, her eyes immediately falling on the box, and I saw that flicker of apprehension again, sharper this time. My father, always more jovial and seemingly less burdened by unspoken histories, just looked confused. "What's this, Ilara?" he asked, his voice easy. "Just some of Clara's old things." I opened the box, carefully taking out the photograph of Eleonora. I held it out to my mother. "Mom," I said, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands. "Who exactly is this woman, and why does she look so much like me?" My mother's face went pale. She glanced at my father, a silent, urgent communication passing between them. My father's smile faltered, replaced by a guarded expression. He cleared his throat. "Ilara, darling," he began, his tone suddenly cautious. "This is a very old story, one we don't often talk about. That wasn't good enough. Not anymore." I felt a surge of something I hadn't expected. Anger. I had a right to know. This was my family, my history. I pushed the photograph closer. She is not just some old relative. She is clearly important. And there are letters in here, journal, talking about secrets, injustice. What are you hiding from me? My mother finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. Her eyes, usually so warm, were filled with a profound sadness. Her name was Eleonora. She was Clara's older sister. The words hung in the air, heavy and unexpected. Clara had an older sister? This was news to me. My grandmother had always spoken of herself as an only child. My mind reeled. This was a significant omission, a deliberate untruth. Why? I felt a cold dread settle in my stomach. An only child. That was the story. A simple, straightforward truth. But now, it was a lie, a carefully constructed illusion. Why would Clara, my beloved grandmother, lie about something so fundamental? "Tell me," I demanded, my voice rising slightly. "Tell me everything." My father sighed, running a hand through his thinning hair. "This is not a conversation for tonight, Ilara. It's complicated. It's painful. Complicated, painful. My entire understanding of my family was unraveling." I pushed harder. "I have a right to know. If it's painful, then it's even more important. It's affecting me. Right now." My mother looked at me, truly looked at me, and I saw a flicker of her own pain, her own burden. She seemed to make a decision, a silent, internal struggle ending in resignation. "All right," she said, her voice hoarse, "but it's not a pretty story, and it doesn't reflect well on some people." She began to tell me, slowly, hesitantly at first, weaving a narrative that was both familiar and utterly alien. Clara and Eleonora, born in a small German village in the early 1900s, daughters of a respected, well-to-do family. Eleonora, the elder, was vivacious, intelligent, fiercely independent. Clara, quieter, more reserved, always in her sister's shadow, yet deeply adoring of her. Then came the war, the rise of a terrifying regime. The family, she explained, was caught in a difficult position. Their wealth, their standing, it made them targets but also offered opportunities for survival. Eleonora, however, was different. She was outspoken, fiercely anti-Nazi, openly critical of the atrocities she witnessed. She became involved with underground resistance groups, using her family's connections and resources to help those in need, to hide dissidents, to smuggle information. My mother spoke of Eleonora with a reverence that surprised me, a hidden admiration I had never seen before. Clara, on the other hand, was terrified. She saw the risks Eleonora was taking, the danger she was bringing upon their family. My mother described a growing rift between the sisters, a chasm of fear and conviction. Clara, desperate to protect her parents and herself, urged Eleonora to be more careful, to stop. Eleonora refused, her moral compass unyielding. And then, my mother's voice dropped to a near whisper, came the betrayal. Eleonora was arrested, taken away in the dead of night. My mother paused, her eyes welling up with tears. She was never seen again. They said she died in a camp. But the truth was far more devastating for our family. My mother took a deep, shaky breath. Clara was the one who told the authorities. She betrayed her sister. The air left my lungs in a rush. I felt a cold wave wash over me, a physical shock. Betrayal. My grandmother, my gentle, loving Clara betraying her own sister? It was inconceivable. It was monstrous. My father put a comforting hand on my mother's arm, his own face etched with pain. It wasn't that simple, Ilara. Clara was young, scared. She thought she was protecting the family. The Gestapo had come to them already, threatening them, promising dire consequences if they didn't cooperate. They were being watched. Clara believed that by giving up Eleonora, she was saving her parents, saving herself. It was a desperate act, born of terror, not malice. But it was still a betrayal, I insisted, my voice tight with emotion. A betrayal that sent her sister to her death. My mother nodded, tears streaming down her face. Yes, and it haunted her every day of her life. That's why she never spoke of Eleonora. That's why she pretended to be an only child. The guilt it consumed her. She spent her life trying to atone, in her own quiet way. I felt sick to my stomach. The Clara I knew, the woman who baked me cookies and told me stories of courage and kindness, was also capable of such an act. It fractured my perception of her, of my entire family. The perfect facade had shattered, revealing a dark, painful history. But the journal I remembered. The journal spoke of injustice. It spoke of a terrible secret. Was it just the betrayal? Or was there more? My mother hesitated again, glancing at my father. He gave her a small, encouraging nod. "There is more, Ilara," she admitted, her voice barely audible. "Much more. Eleonora was not just an activist. She was also a talented artist, an accomplished musician. And she was in love. With a man named Klaus. He was also involved in the resistance. A brilliant physicist. They had plans, dreams. They were going to marry. My heart ached for this lost love story. But what happened to him? I asked. He was also arrested, my mother said, shortly after Eleonora. But unlike her, he wasn't sent to a camp. He was interrogated, tortured. They wanted information about the resistance network, and they wanted his scientific knowledge. He was a genius, even then. A cold dread began to creep in again, a sense of foreboding. What did this have to do with my family? My mother took a deep breath. Klaus had developed something. A new technology. Something that could revolutionize energy or be used as a weapon. The Nazis were desperate for it. Eleonora knew about it. She was trying to get his research out of the country. This was getting bigger, more dangerous than I could have imagined. This wasn't just a family secret. It was a piece of history, a potential global impact. And Clara, I prompted, my voice barely a whisper. What was her role in this? My mother's eyes met mine, filled with a profound sorrow. When Clara betrayed Eleonora, she also gave them information about Klaus. She knew where he was hiding some of his research, some of his notes. Not the full scope, but enough to lead them to him. She didn't know what they would do to him. She thought if she gave them something, anything, they would leave her family alone. The implications hit me like a physical blow. Not only had Clara condemned her sister, but she had also indirectly led to the capture and torture of Eleonora's beloved. The weight of this revelation was crushing. My grandmother's quiet life, her gentle demeanor, now seemed like a fragile shell covering an abyss of guilt and regret. "But the journal," I said, reaching for it, my hands trembling. Eleonora wrote about a terrible injustice. And she wrote about someone else. A child. My parents exchanged another look, a silent, heavy conversation passing between them. My father took my mother's hand. "This is the hardest part, Ilara," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Eleonora, she was pregnant when she was arrested. The world spun. Pregnant. My mind struggled to process this. My grandmother's sister, pregnant, betrayed, and sent to her death. And the child? What happened to the child?" My mother answered, her voice barely audible. "When Eleonora was taken, she was already showing. They kept her for a while, in a special facility. They wanted to use her to get more information, to break her. But she never gave them anything. They kept her alive just long enough for the baby to be born." "And then," I asked, my heart pounding in my chest, "what happened to the baby?" My mother's eyes filled with fresh tears. The baby, a little girl, She was taken away immediately. They told Eleonora she had died. They told everyone she had died. But she didn't. My breath hitched. She didn't? Then where is she? Who is she? My father spoke this time, his voice heavy with the burden of years of silence. The baby was given away. To a family connected to the regime. A family who wanted a child, and who were willing to take one from a family who was deemed an enemy of the state. My father's words hung in the air, a shroud of icy dread descending upon me, an enemy of the state. My great-aunt Eleonora, a woman I had never known, but whose memory now throbbed with a raw, new pain, had been deemed an enemy, and her child, her innocent child, had been stolen and given to the very architects of her destruction. The injustice was a physical blow. My vision blurred, the room swaying around me. I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead. "Who?" I demanded, my voice a strangled whisper, my throat tight with unshed tears and burgeoning fury. Who was she given to? Who is she? My mother reached across the table, her hand trembling as it sought mine. Her grip was weak, but the intensity in her eyes was fierce. "We never wanted you to know this, my child. We wanted to protect you from this burden, from this danger." Danger? What danger? The danger was already here, festering in the heart of our family, a poison seeping through generations. The secret was the danger, the silence. My father sighed, a sound that seemed to carry the weight of decades of unspoken grief. He looked from my mother to me, his gaze heavy. He said, "We feared for your safety, and for hers. If the regime ever suspected she was Eleanor's child, especially after all these years, it would shatter everything. It would expose her, and it would expose us for knowing." "But you knew," I countered, my voice rising slightly, betraying the tremor in my chest. "All this time you knew? All these years? You kept this from me? From everyone?" My mother squeezed my hand tighter. "It was not a choice we made lightly," she said. "It was a choice born of terror. The terror of what they could do, what they did do to Eleonora. We saw what happened to those who spoke out, those who questioned. We saw families vanish. We saw lives extinguished. We believed the greatest protection for everyone was silence, for us, for you, and especially for her. Her. The unknown child." My mind raced, trying to grasp the enormity of this revelation. A cousin, a blood relative, existed somewhere, living a life I knew nothing about, a life built on a foundation of lies and stolen identity. How could they have kept such a monumental secret? How could they have carried such a burden? My father leaned forward, his elbows on the table, his eyes fixed on some distant point. "We didn't know for certain at first," he explained. "There were whispers, fragments. A nurse who had been sympathetic to Eleanor's plight, a guard who had a conscience. They risked their lives to send out coded messages, hints that the child had not died, that she had been taken. An underground network," my mother added, her voice regaining a touch of its usual clarity, though still tinged with sorrow. "A network of brave souls who defied the regime in small, desperate ways. They worked to save what they could, to preserve fragments of truth. It was through them that we learned the baby, a girl, was given to a family high up in the regime, a family who, ironically, had been unable to have children of their own. They sought to adopt, and the regime saw an opportunity. A loyal family, a child from an enemy. A perfect propaganda piece, if ever needed. A way to show mercy, perhaps, or simply to ensure the child was raised in the correct ideology, far from the influence of her true family. The irony was a bitter taste in my mouth. Eleonora's daughter, raised by the very people who had taken her mother's life. It was a twisted, grotesque mockery of justice. "Did you try to find her?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Did you try to get her back?" My parents exchanged a glance, a silent conversation passing between them that spoke volumes of past pain and impossible choices. My father answered, his voice thick with regret. We couldn't. It was too dangerous. To make inquiries, to show any interest would have immediately drawn suspicion. The regime was paranoid. They watched everyone, especially the families of those they had, purged. Any attempt to reclaim her would have not only put our lives at risk, but, more importantly, would have revealed her true parentage to the adoptive family and by extension to the regime. And then her life would have been truly forfeit. They would not have tolerated a child of an enemy living in a prominent family if her true origins were known. They would have removed her, silenced her. So you left her, I said, the words a raw accusation, though I knew, intellectually, the impossible position they had been in. You left her with them, to be raised by them. My mother's eyes filled with tears again. It was the hardest decision we ever made, she confessed, her voice cracking. Every day, for decades, we have lived with that decision. We monitored from afar, as best we could. Through the same network, we received occasional updates. She was well. She was thriving. She was loved, in their way. We told ourselves that was enough, that her safety, her life was paramount. We convinced ourselves it was a form of protection, to let her live a lie, rather than die for the truth. But what about the truth? I pressed, my mind reeling. Doesn't she deserve to know? Doesn't she deserve her real family? My father shook his head slowly. The truth, in this world, is often a weapon, he said. And sometimes, it's a burden too heavy to bear. We hoped that one day, when the regime crumbled, when it was safe, we could tell her. But the years passed, the regime tightened its grip, and the opportunity never came. And then, as she grew, she became intertwined with that family, with their world. To tell her then would have been to tear her life apart, to destroy everything she knew. My mother added, it would have meant exposing her adoptive parents as collaborators, as people who knowingly or unknowingly adopted a child from an K-Can enemy. It would have brought down their world, and potentially hers. It was a web of deceit and power, and we were just two people trying to survive, trying to keep our family, what was left of it, safe. I leaned back in my chair, the weight of their confession pressing down on me. It was a story of impossible choices, of love and fear intertwined. I could see the pain etched on their faces, the long years of carrying this secret. But still, a part of me recoiled, to know such a thing, to carry such a truth, and to remain silent. It felt like a betrayal, not just of Eleonora, but of her daughter. Tell me, I urged, my voice gaining strength despite the tremor. Tell me about her, about the family. Give me every detail. My father took a deep breath, steeling himself. The family was the Vespers, he began. General Elias Vesper, a man known for his ruthlessness and his unwavering loyalty to the supreme leader. His wife Ilara Vesper, a woman from a prominent but less politically active family, known for her charitable work and her elegant demeanor. They lived in the Old Quarter, in that large estate overlooking the river, the one with the sculpted gardens. My breath hitched. The Old Quarter, the large estate. My mind, still reeling from the initial shock, began to piece together fragments of information, memories, details I had always taken for granted. The Vesper family. I knew of them, of course. Everyone did. General Vesper was a titan of the regime, his name synonymous with power and unyielding authority. And Ilara Vesper, a woman of impeccable grace, often featured in society columns, lauded for her philanthropy. But it was a different Vesper that sent a cold, sharp spike of ice through my heart. My mother continued, unaware of the internal earthquake she was causing. They adopted the baby girl, giving her the name Serafina. She was raised with every advantage, every privilege, educated in the finest schools, tutored by the best minds. She grew into a remarkable young woman, intelligent, poised, dedicated to the ideals of the regime. As was expected of her, she embraced their values, their history, their legacy. She believed it all. Serafina. The name echoed in the hollow chambers of my mind, each syllable a hammer blow against the fragile walls of my reality. Serafina Vesper. It couldn't be. It simply could not be. My mind screamed in denial, even as the pieces slotted together with horrifying precision. The old quarter estate, the sculpted gardens, the reputation of the family. And Serafina. Serafina, who I had known for years. Serafina, who was not just an acquaintance, but a friend. A close friend. A confidant. No, I whispered, my voice barely audible, a desperate plea to the universe to undo this impossible truth. It can't be Serafina. My parents looked at me, their faces etched with confusion, then dawning realization. My father's eyes widened. You know her? He asked, his voice hushed. I stared at them, tears finally overflowing and streaming down my face. Know her? I repeated, the words choked with a mixture of horror and betrayal. She's my best friend. She's been my friend since childhood. We went to school together. We shared everything. The silence that followed was deafening, suffocating. My parents looked utterly devastated, as if my words had delivered a fresh wound. My mother covered her mouth with a trembling hand, her eyes wide with shock. My father sagged in his chair, his face pale. My best friend, Serafina Vesper, the daughter of General Elias Vesper, the woman I had laughed with, cried with, shared my deepest secrets with, the woman who was, in fact, my cousin, the daughter of Eleonora, the sister of my grandmother, stolen and raised by the very people who had persecuted her true family. The world tilted again, not gently this time, but violently, threatening to topple me into an abyss of disbelief. Every memory, every shared moment with Serafina was suddenly recontextualized, viewed through a prism of unthinkable deception. Her unwavering belief in the regime, her passionate defense of its policies, her fierce loyalty to her adoptive parents, it all made a horrifying, tragic sense. She wasn't just a loyal citizen. She was a product of their indoctrination, a living symbol of their power, a constant, unwitting insult to her true lineage. How could you not know? I demanded, my voice rising in a crescendo of raw anguish and anger. How could you not have known she was my friend? That she was woven into the fabric of my life? My mother wept openly now, shaking her head. We knew she was enrolled in the same schools, she stammered, but we kept our distance. We never dared to imagine you would become so close. We tried to guide you, to keep your circle small, to protect you from the regime's children. But you were always so outgoing, so open. We thought it was just a coincidence, a superficial friendship. We never knew the depth of your bond. A superficial friendship? Serafina and I had been inseparable. We had navigated adolescence together, shared dreams of the future, confided our fears. She was family, in all but blood, and now I learned she was family's and bride's blood, stolen and raised by our enemies, a secret kept from me by my own parents. The layers of irony, of tragedy, were almost unbearable. My father, his voice hoarse, tried to explain. We were so careful, he said. So afraid. We chose not to know too much, not to track her too closely, for fear of revealing our interest. We received only the broadest strokes of information, enough to confirm her well-being, but nothing more. We thought it was safer that way, to maintain ignorance, even from ourselves, as a shield that had inadvertently allowed a profound, unbearable truth to fester at the very core of my existence. Serafina. My Serafina. My cousin. The daughter of Eleonora. The thought was a relentless, agonizing echo in my mind. What do I do? I asked, the question escaping my lips as a desperate plea. What do I do with this? How do I look at her now? How do I live with this knowledge? My mother reached for me again, her touch gentle but insistent. You do nothing, she pleaded. You say nothing. You continue as before. For your sake, for her sake, for everyone's sake. Continue as before? I scoffed, a bitter, humorless sound. How can I continue as before? Everything has changed. Everything I thought I knew about my life, about my family, about my closest friend. It's all a lie. A carefully constructed lie. My father's gaze was weary, filled with an ancient sorrow. We know, he said. We understand the burden we've placed upon you. But think, my child, think of the consequences. If Serafina learns the truth, her entire world will be shattered. The family she loves, the parents she adores, will